Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We can get started right away. We are excited to bring you Pia Wanek, who is Global Community's Vice President of Humanitarian Assistance. Pia has just returned from a visit to Ukraine and Poland, so she's going to update us on the situation there and on Global Community's history in Ukraine and what we are doing in terms of a response to this crisis that everyone's here to hear about. So again, Pia, she's our Vice President of Humanitarian Assistance. She's directed Global Community's responses to various crises, including the Ebola epidemic in West Africa, the 2014 war in Gaza, and the ongoing conflicts in Syria and Yemen. Pia has a rich history of this kind of work. She's worked for USAID's Office of U.S. Foreign Disaster Assistance for several years, predominantly on East and Central Africa emergency response programs. And she's supported the civil military portfolio at the State Department's Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration, and also strategic planning and policy development at the Consular Affairs Bureau at the State Department. So, and we're really pleased to announce that as of April 25th, Pia will actually take on a new role as Senior Vice President of Global Programs at Global Communities. And that's a new position that was created to better integrate our sustainable development and our humanitarian assistance portfolios. So welcome, Pia. Thank you for leading us in this discussion.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much, Megan. How can you read me? You hear me okay?
Yep.
Excellent. Well, really appreciate the opportunity to come in and speak with folks a little bit more about the situation in Ukraine and what we're planning on doing to respond, even though it's quite a sobering situation for sure, since the hostilities intensified on February the 24th. It really makes you proud to be working for an organization like Global Communities that's been working there for a good long time and is now really looking towards ramping up a pretty substantial response in reaction to the critical needs that are there. So we have an existing program in Ukraine. Since 2016, Global Communities has led an international consortium of organizations in Ukraine implementing a $67 million decentralization program that improves the ability of 100 local governments across all regions of the country to identify and support the needs of their communities, focusing on promoting gender equality, women's empowerment, and enhancing economic sustainability. And through this work, our team on the ground has developed really close working networks and relationships with local governments and civil society organizations, very much at the hyper-local level across 10 different oblasts of the country. And at the moment, we're conducting rapid assessments and maintaining really close contact with our partners, with the network that we have, to identify the specific needs and priorities in each of those affected areas that they're working in those communities. Of course, they're dealing both with, depending on the locations, dealing with bombardment directly, as well as, of course, the massive flow of humanity that is the conditions that we're seeing now, with probably seen as well from the United Nations and from others. We're looking at every day the numbers go up, more than 10 million that have been displaced. The numbers crossing borders are well over 4 million as well, to all the different neighboring countries, predominantly Poland at the moment as one of the largest reception countries. And of course, we're seeing the conflict just intensify and no end in sight at the moment. So we have existing memorandums of understanding with each of the oblast administrations, which provides us access to continue to work even in the areas that are affected. And these partnerships that we have with the local self-government and civil society organizations really allow us to reach deeply and broadly to help strengthen the outreach that we're trying to do for the humanitarian aid efforts that we're ramping up from across borders. So our team has been able to maintain contact. Well, we have 100 communities that we've been working with around Ukraine since 2016. 78 of those we've been able to assess most recently, mostly through telephone interviews and that type of thing, to be able to determine specifically what their needs are. And we continue to follow up with them as well to try to get the most current information on the things that they're looking for in terms of support. We're hearing everything from sadly, some of the basics, really. I mean, food, water issues are concerning in some areas. non-food items as well, such as, beds, bedding, winter clothing, sort of your whole spectrum of assistance that you would need if you sort of think to yourself of being in a situation where you've had to leave literally without anything, just a small bag or, something going to a new area where you don't know anyone. So there's both the support needed for the displaced and for those that are actually hosting others that are coming in. There's a substantial amount of need as well that we're seeing in the cities through the West, mainly. As you can see, the population movement has very much gone towards the West. And so we're building on a lot of the capacity that we've had working in a number of different crises around the world to try to leverage a very large scale response to the conditions there. So in my trip as well, I was out in Poland for about a week. It was about a week and a half ago where we decided that we had secured contact with all of our staff as well. That was definitely the number one priority for all of us. We have 55 staff that are, 53 of them are Ukrainian nationals. 2 of our internationals, one, our chief of party, evacuated from Kyiv with his family to Romania, where he is now, still helping and directing some of the response from there. We have 17 staff in total who've left the country. You may have heard as well that male Ukrainians as well, between the ages of 18 and 60 cannot leave the country as well. So of course that includes some of our staff, though I'm happy to report that none of our staff have actually been conscripted or taken up arms as well. Just in terms of the resources that they're able to provide still for the aid effort, we're very grateful that they're still able to continue working on that. There are a lot of different things that we're hoping to be able to lean into when it comes to a response. When I was first in Krakow, engaging with a number of the different United Nations coordination meetings that are there, it was very clear that there's dramatic needs inside Ukraine, and there's dramatic needs for refugees and host communities as well, in countries to include in Poland. After a small bit of time in Krakow, I went down to Rzeszów, and if there's native Polish speakers that are listening to me right now, I apologize for destroying all of the name pronunciations as well, but Rzeszów is less than an hour from the Ukrainian border, and that's become the sort of the broader international community's hub for coordinating the whole of Ukraine response. So there's the UN Office of Coordination for Humanitarian Affairs. There's a very senior level coordinator. And, even in going around the room in the coordination cell that we were in, there were representatives from, NATO, various different governments, of course, the Ukrainian support networks as well that everyone is trying to pull through. So you had non-governmental organizations from all across Europe, from around the world as well, and staff really coming in and out, trying to determine what is the best way that we can organize the massive amount of assistance that is needed for this dramatically, just an enormous crisis. And the coordination challenge is a difficult one. You've seen as well, just the pictures as well, where it's kind of amazing to see the solidarity of communities from basically anyone, it seemed, who was packing their cars, with resources. I actually heard one story of someone who was in university in Germany, and actually with some friends, he was a Ukrainian national at university in Germany, had a link into some friends that were still at home in Ukraine, and actually literally packed his van with whatever he could find from axes and, different kinds of building related commodities, different ways to kind of fortify homes, plus, food and just basic commodities, and drove, to the border like many others did. And as a Ukrainian could cross the border relatively easy to be able to drop off this aid. So it is a massive and phenomenal effort with organizations big and small, individuals big and small, that are really trying to push in assistance. But we're also seeing it's a huge coordination effort now. I traveled into Lviv to visit with 3 of our staff from the governance program I mentioned. It's a policy lead. It happens to be one of our most senior finance related individuals. It was really, it was amazing to actually be able to sit and talk with them, but it was also very sobering to see in Lviv, so many displaced, really, women with, children in strollers, and the informal settlements, I guess we would call them as well, sort of like the way station types of, there's cots set up, in sort of in a square or in sort of a church hall and that type of thing for people who are just fleeing into Lviv and then trying to get across the border into Poland from there. So it was exceptional to sort of to talk with our staff as well and to get a better sense for how they're able to work, how they're able to sort of even just participate as much as they can in the response effort, even in Lviv. I think that it's really been just the solidarity that we're seeing with everyone trying to actually do whatever they can in their circumstance was really exceptional to see, but it was sobering. I mean, it took more than a couple of hours to cross the border, and then quite a substantial amount of time to come back, and just seeing the sea of humanity of people as well, was absolutely, difficult to see and very sobering. But also, there are a lot of different organizations that are also stepping in to be able to respond. And I think what we're trying to do as well, given our experience within global communities, working, unfortunately, the situation in Syria is probably the one here that is giving us the most expertise, so to speak, to be able to respond, given that it's a protected situation, it's a conflict zone, there's very marginalized people that you are trying to support. So we're looking at everything from, psychosocial support for those that have been affected. We're looking at cash primarily, multi-purpose cash, ways for people to actually be able to secure assistance themselves, because in the assessments we've done with the telephone interviews and things like that, I was mentioning with our civil society organizations, they're saying that in some places the markets actually have commodities. So best for us to be able to provide resources for them to actually purchase what they need in real time, as close as possible to where they're located, as compared to necessarily trucking things in. In other circumstances, you do need to truck in the assistance because their things aren't there. So that's why that information gathering is so critical. We're also looking at shelter repair related activities at some point, hopefully when things settle down, and hopefully the escalation of hostilities does end. And we're very well positioned as an organization to be able to do, rubble removal, for example, which is something that'll clearly be needed. This is an experience that I think both PCI and global communities has experienced from the Haiti earthquake as well in 2010. Also looking at some larger scale, potentially positioned for some larger scale infrastructure related support based on our experience. For example, rehabilitating water sanitation infrastructure of some kind. But also interestingly in the program, the governance program previously, we did activities to include, building playgrounds, for sort of more for municipal support. And there were community centers that we would support through that program. So we really feel like as an organization, we have really deep and broad ties into Ukraine. It is a massive coordination effort, as I mentioned. I think there's still going to be a lot that we're going to be positioning to do inside Ukraine. And we're also looking at a response in Poland with refugees. We have some experience working with refugees in a number of different contexts. But again, this is where, I'm seeing the need for both sort of the much larger scale response from organizations like the UN, refugee coordinator. And there's definitely sort of the big picture response to make sure that people have the protections that they need. But there's also things like, we were hearing from our chief of party, for example, who's in Romania, as I mentioned, and even through some networks there, he's new to Romania, first time he's been sort of working there specifically, but even in the network of, for example, there's a small women's group that his wife was clued into, and there's a real groundswell of sort of organic local support of a local organization, a women's group on one side of the border that, of course, the identity of that region is very much intertwined between Ukraine and Romania and some of these other border areas, like any other border areas of different countries. And so they're creating something of a sister network with an NGO that they're creating that's already present on the Ukrainian side of the border. So small scale assistance, woman to woman in that as well, and really looking. I think it's phenomenal to see that there's that scale of response that's needed, of course, at that micro level, but there's also the large scale response for what we know is going to be a protracted crisis there right now that's still intensifying, as well as for the broader response that we would like to be a part of for the infrastructure build, hopefully when hostilities end. I've shared a lot of different things as we've seen, and even coming back, I flew back through Germany, for example, which is definitely a site where there's a lot of Ukrainians have been encouraged to come to, and also are in Germany as well. And it was also very sobering as well, like being on the flights with Ukrainian, over the age of 60, who hadn't been on a plane before, who were sort of looking to that, a first opportunity, and also it was kind of sobering to see, that people were at that point where they have to leave the country, someplace they've been, clearly for a very long time, was very intimidating as well. Some of them, even there were some that, as we crossed over into Frankfurt, they just made it to Frankfurt, and then, they were there, and they were asking the border security, like, we're here, that this is as far as we have. So that it's a whole network of goodwill and support that's needed to sort of help people with that next step in terms of where they, ensuring we have good information from them on where they would potentially want to go, but also just to be the support of the community, all of us together in that as they come across. So I'd be happy to answer. I mean, there's a lot of things that I've shared here, but I'd be happy to answer any questions or comments about what I was able to see both in Poland and in Ukraine, and any sort of broadening out any of these kinds of ideas that we have right now as we are also fleshing out our substantial response to this crisis.
Thanks, Pia. And to everyone in the audience, if you have questions, you're welcome to come off mute if you'd prefer that, or you can always put your question in the chat and we will be happy to direct them at Pia. I know, Pia, actually, if I can sort of lead off here, I had, there's been a lot in the news about, the risk of human trafficking in these crisis situations. That's something that, PCI and Global Communities has done some work on both internationally and here in San Diego. And I know there are some people on the line who have supported that work. And I was wondering if you could speak to that, how Global Communities programming sort of addresses those risks, or what other NGOs or organizations are doing in that area.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's a huge, it is again a huge risk, particularly with it being women and children only that can leave the country. So in terms of the response as well, there's we sort of take a broad protection lens to the work that we're doing, and this is everything from ensuring that for the collective centers that are being developed, that there's that you're controlling who actually gets access into them and out of them. And there were a number of different organizations there as well that I was seeing. There have been reports you've probably seen as well of individuals that are driving to the border with a sign that basically says I'll take 3 women without children, I'm heading to Berlin, let's go, kind of thing. We were definitely hearing more and more reports of that when I was out there as well. So it is becoming, I think there's the UN protection cluster, which is sort of the coordination group of all the different partners that work in that space, that in the anti-trafficking space, in that sort of broader, a broader understanding of the various types of protections that you need for vulnerable groups. That's sort of I would say that a part of the full spectrum of assistance that we would be able to provide. There's also, of course, the with unaccompanied minors as well, that we've seen that have crossed the borders. There's a whole network with the ICRC and others who've been able to step in to try to respond in that way. A lot of it right now is pushing out really solid information in all the local languages as well, in terms of it is fantastic to have groups that are reaching in and trying to help, but it does have to be coordinated. There are very clear minimum international standards for how you sort of address these kinds of risks. And it's really important, as we do it, sort of a massive train up of a lot of people in these kinds of skills, to be able to make sure that we're looking at that more specifically. And yeah, I'm glad that we have that kind of expertise internally as well in terms of the anti-trafficking piece.
Hello, this is Norm Hapke. Can you hear me?
Hi, Norm. How are you?
Fine, thanks. A couple of things. I think it's important that you are giving out money because in a lot of the third developing, whatever you want to call it, they're finding that is the best thing to do because people know that's what they need. So that's one thing. Secondly, I always look at this in a sense of a mallet and scalpel. We've got big organizations like the UN with lots of money and other organizations, but they're blunt instruments in that they need to work through scalpels like Global Communities and other organizations who can actually do the work carefully and with least risk of fraud. Are you finding that the systems that are being developed to handle all this stuff are working in that way so that you can ensure that most of what's getting there is going without fraud to the right people, et cetera?
It's a great, I'm so glad to have heard your first point too, that cash is best, right? It's getting the resources to those who know best what it is that they can purchase and what it is that they need. I think it's really good reinforcement of that point. And I would say, yes, it is a massive coordination effort. I mean, there's the institutional levels, of course, the UN, the big governments as well, there's support to the different governments in the region. But absolutely, there is that next step down to different kinds of organizations with different types of missions and expertise. So for example, there's quite a number of medical focused NGOs that are there, which is fantastic, right? You need people with trauma medicine experience who are willing to go into affected areas. Great, they should be doing that, right? How can we sort of support those organizations to do that? There's others like us as well. And I think that we're, everyone, when I was there as well, is keen to partner with us as well. And with those organizations that have that presence in Ukraine and have that specific network into local organizations, right? Because you can't only push assistance to, let's say, the municipal level, right? Just into a government structure, particularly for a program where we've been doing decentralization, right? It's been a governance program for the past 6 years. There's still trust that needs to be built into the government structure. So for us, it's so important that we are able to build and truly build out the good work of decentralizing and building out the civil society that's there. So I'd say, yes, we're able to become more of that scalpel, so to speak, using your terminology there. But what's also, I think, really valuable is that we have credibility as an organization because we've done very sensitive related responses in a compliant manner in very difficult places like Syria and Yemen in the past. So having that kind of reputation coming in of having a good sense for all of our assistance is community driven, even in this circumstance, right? You still have to do an assessment. You don't just ruck up with, what you think somebody needs and dump it there. That's not appropriate. And I think that's one thing that's been a differentiator for global communities in my mind is always that we take a bit of the extra time to do that kind of assessment, to have that, to do the landscape analysis, do the scenarios and determine, okay, what exactly is it that is needed to be able to be appropriate and what we actually put forward. I think there's a role for a lot of different kinds of organizations in this to include us.
If I can piggyback on that, that's one of the reasons why I've been such a big cheerleader for these two organizations, because I remember in Vietnam, they used to say, well, the village needed a well, so we built them a school, or vice versa. It's always been both culturally appropriate and listening and working on the ground level that has been the hallmark for what I have seen as the success of both of these organizations. And part of this right now is there are lots of bad actors on the Ukrainian side and whatever side, like you talked about. We'll take 3 unaccompanied women to Berlin, want to go. I mean, that's the kind of scam that scumbags are starting to do. And so being on the ground and listening and finding those things is very, very important, because this is a wonderful time for real jerks to see what they can get by taking the main chance. Secondly, when I first started this, I as a military background, I realized that the Russians were going to have a lot of difficulty in what's called combat in built-up areas, and what that means is they're losing lots and lots of people in the cities. So what they're going to do, in my view, is pull back and just start shelling the crap out of all of these places indiscriminately, because that is the way they defeated Berlin in 1945. They had 9,000 artillery pieces fighting, shooting into Berlin, but they still lost 100,000 men taking it. So they're uninterested in collateral damage. They don't give a rat's patoot about that. So, and I think this war is going to devolve into a war of attrition where they're going to hold back and just really massacre the cities. And it's going to be a long time. And so it seems to me all of these organizations like this are going to have to gear up for a long slog, and hope that the attention of the communities in the world continues. We have a lamentably short attention span, and I hope that we can sustain our interest in humanitarian stuff, because it's going to be it's a big country, a lot of people, and peripheral people. We're going to have to support Poland. We're going to have to support Romania, all these people, because they're being inundated. Jordan has been with the war in Syria, etc. Anyway, I'll shut up now and let other people talk.
No, it's definitely, I mean, it is sobering on many different levels, but I think this is where, so for example, we're having conversations with our financial inclusion arm, VITAS group, for example, which is, in global communities, of course, we do the humanitarian assistance. We also do longer term sustainable development activities. And we also look at ways to sort of, seek capital for, individuals and small businesses that are also looking to rebuild. And also, so we're having some really interesting conversations now with the Romania VITAS crew about taking that medium to longer term view of how to support individuals, right? Because it's, even when I was seeing in Poland and speaking with individuals, we're affiliated with a university there as well, and they've been hosting. There's a trajectory that people have gone through. It's sort of, obviously, it's the initial trauma, of course, that needs to be managed. It's the initial, there's soup kitchens and things like this, and there's you can get some of these sort of basic things. That's 3 to 5 days, a weekend or so. They're asking, my child doesn't speak Polish. I appreciate that they can go to the school. They don't want to go to school. They don't speak the language. How can we respond? I want an income. And, obviously I want to be able to work to some degree as well. I don't have an income. I've spent what I had to be able to get here, or I don't have a way to, tap into my job remotely. Or for some, I fled without my computer. I have none of my papers. I have nothing with me. That we're at that next step now, because it's been a number of weeks for what is the whole of society response that is needed. And we really have to start grappling with that, or it will be destabilizing. It's already becoming destabilizing in countries in the region as well. And I think it's important to take that longer term view. Of course, the front end assistance, the trauma aid that I was mentioning earlier, that's critical. But there's also that next step there. And given our long history, I see Barbara Jones on the phone as well. Oh my goodness, it's great to see you. Instrumental in building out our Poland programming for many, many years, 30 plus as well. So there's a network, I think, of organizational understanding for staying the course and building out whatever we can in support for what is going to be an extraordinary difficult couple of years here.
One other question. I'm sorry, I'm monopolizing this, but
Norm, I have to give you the 0-minute warning too. So we are wrapping it at 11:30. So we always love to hear from you.
Okay, I'll make it real quick. What have you learned from your cooperation with GC and PCI in the Haitian, very successful Haitian work that you did that informed what you're doing now?
We're the recovery effort that we were a part of in Haiti, both organizations, I think is going to be instrumental. So for example, in the transitional shelter adaptation that was created in the Haiti response, from what I understand, I think as we get into what hopefully will be past the absolute acute emergency phase for this crisis, that's going to be the kind of information, that kind of innovation, that kind of thinking outside the box, I think is what we're going to have to bring to what hopefully will be helping to rebuild.
Pia, thank you so much. Does anyone else have any questions that they'd like to ask Pia while we have her in person? And do feel free to reach out to the email address that came with your invitation, to me, to Uli, to Amanda, to anyone on staff, to Pia, and ask questions. We are happy to address whatever questions you have and provide any additional information that you need. So thank you so much for joining us today. And Pia, thank you. It's really incredible for us on the PCI side to now be, joined with global communities where we have this tremendous humanitarian assistance, and response capability. That's really something that we're really happy to be a part of now as a united global community. So we appreciate the work that you do and the time that you took today. And thank you to all our guests for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Keep in touch.
Thank you. Thank you.